All right, so the topic of today is inspired by a video that I was listening to while I was working, basically like a radio, and it was about Gen Alpha and their unruliness. And I was wondering if it was about the parents, because some of the examples they were using, it kind of seemed like a lot of millennial parents are now spoiling their kids as a response to the way that they were raised by their Gen X slash boomer parents. Now, obviously, I've talked about habits going into the workforce and how those drip down in the generations. Now, I think it's time to look at the modern day version of home life, the things that happen outside of the workplace. Now, obviously, people in my age group, we didn't really see good models for keeping a marriage together or raising kids, for that matter of fact. I know because there's a lot of people in my age group who go no contact with their parents. Now, me, I have limited contact. I have a few things that have happened in my adolescence that had caused me to feel a certain way about things between me and my parents myself, but parenting can be the hardest job in the world. Like they say, there is no instruction manual. And if you put yourself in their shoes, what do you think they were thinking when they were looking at me when I was struggling as a kid, when I was being a little unruly? They probably were thinking, what are we going to do? There's no instruction manual to handling this, so you're kind of left hanging. Obviously, I understand that my parents themselves probably grew up in a harder environment, not necessarily financially, but you probably weren't even allowed to talk back without being backhanded or some extreme stuff, like something that my generation would consider straight up abuse. In fact, I actually received some of that as a child. If I were to act way out of line, I'd probably get backhanded because that is the model that they had to go after. But I understand that because they have had their step in the trauma cycle, they have certain shortcomings in adulthood. And I think it's interesting because a lot of the traumas I was experiencing in that generational trauma cycle, I feel like I've tried to overcome and make peace with. And it's interesting seeing how you've come a longer way in that than your parents have. And you see how that there's still wounds that you didn't even know they had because they never told you, or, they didn't have to. But it's interesting to see how once you get to know them as an adult to adult level, then their behavior patterns as you were growing up tend to make sense. So I do go limited contact because I realize that some people aren't always going to be looking for that internal struggle on how to better themselves. Maybe because it's probably better that way. Maybe sometimes my endless inner pursuit to heal myself and try and do better can be blinding to me to what's right in front of my face. But long story short, I just don't talk to them about certain things. But other people in my generation tend to have said, you know what, everything that my parents did to me, I am going to do the complete opposite because I don't want to add to the generational trauma. However, when I see what they call permissive parenting, where they just allow their kid to do whatever, that could be a complete pendulum swing, in my opinion. And honestly, I'm going to say this, I know that this is not every case. Sometimes the internet likes to put an amplification, like a black pill filter on it, where they show the most extreme examples to make a point on a video, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes we could look at all those examples and think those are the only examples out there and that there's nobody doing something different or no balance. But I'm going to be looking at the more extreme examples of like this permissive parenting where they are afraid to correct their kids because they want to stay super far away from the experiences that they've had as a kid. But what is sometimes putting a kid in an environment where they could get away with anything and they could do no wrong, well, it illy prepares them for life, and it actually breeds what they're calling a more narcissistic generation. And one of the things I was listening to was how a lot of educators are thinking about hanging up the towel and they're choosing to back out of the education system. Even one of my closest friends, who actually was my PE teacher, tells me all the time that the generations are getting more worse. More kids don't have a lot of role models nowadays. Like, it only just tends to be more outnumbered in the way of there's more bad than good out there. And I do take his word for him because he is an honest guy. I actually dated a school teacher for very briefly, and the stories I would hear when she came home were very crazy. Like, I didn't even know that I didn't even know kids were capable of that stuff. If I pulled half the stuff these kids pulled, I'd be expelled from school. But the power of Skibbity Toilet Riz and Put the Fries in the Bag, Bro are now more powerful than ever. And it kind of adds a little bit more of a darker layer because the people who want to raise their kids with some balance. Like, I understand the shortcomings and the harshness that was subjected to my generation in certain forms. I got some of that. I'm going to try to avoid that as a parent in the future. But I will tell you one thing. I'm not going to allow my kid to get away with just everything. I'm going to teach him to obviously stand up for himself, but I'm not going to teach him to be a bully. I am going to teach him to, be good to himself and give himself time to breathe on the grind that we call life. But I'm not going to let him be lazy. In fact, one of the best things I want to do for him is get him into martial arts and wrestling because it will instill a sense of both security so he could defend himself and discipline. So when you learn how to competitively grapple, nothing else is going to be scary ever again. Now, maybe that might not be their thing. Maybe they might do hockey or baseball or something like that. But I do want to make sure that my kid knows what it's like to have some sort of a passion at an early age in life, because I was kind of misguided as a child and I didn't really have any authentic passions until sometime in my 20s when I was able to get on that martial arts journey myself, and it taught me how to turn my life around, and I went from being a party animal with no direction in life to actually someone who wants to actually try something and see what works for him. Sometimes we overanalyze how we're going to go about it, but sometimes the best way is just to start, like these videos. I'm obviously going to be making tweaks to the channel in the future, but I feel like the more I just don't think about it and actually just kind of let it rip, the better it is. But where am I getting at with this? This is an example of the kind of stuff I really want to teach my children, because if you just let them do whatever, you can't really complain about them being poorly parented when they're not being parented. But I also want to give some bright light to the black pill that seems like the millennials kind of fumbling the bag a little bit with their kids just due to, again, a lack of proper guidance. And this is going to sound super misanthropic, but I think it might just be in human nature to not have balance, like for 90% of us. I'm not going to say all of us, because I know a few gifted souls who actually can balance out and not throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I've noticed a majority of people usually go from one extreme to another, or because one side doesn't like them, they go completely to the other side and fully embrace it without, wondering what does this other side, what do they not agree with? And they don't really form a sense of individuality and pick or choose what it is that they actually truly at their heart agree or believe in, which bleeds into parenting. And this is where we get this permissive parenting, where a lot of kids are just now having no guidance, and now they think that they could get away with anything. And I say 90% because I do want to point to some really good examples. I have this buddy of mine who is a very devout father. Actually, a lot of devout parents, especially when you see the kids' classes in the martial arts dojos. You see groups of parents who are doing it right, who are trying to get their kids to have that sense of community, make sure that they're socialized, making sure that they're not chronically online, making sure that they're not grooming them to be influencers so they can make money off of them, which could also really mess a kid up. You see plenty of examples of parents who just want the best for their kid, and maybe they're not going to figure out or get that test right 100%. Obviously, as a parent, you're probably going to make a few mistakes. I think I could get mad about the stuff that my parents did to me that I'm a little upset about, in my adulthood that didn't equip me for life. But I can understand that maybe in the future, when I'm old and gray, I might have my 20-year-old kids asking me questions. Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? We are but a step in the endless cycle that is a society. But seeing the example of people who are just trying to honestly figure it out and trying to honestly move forward. Like one of my partners in grappling is a very devout father. I think he has 2 kids. He has a wife, and he's a devout Christian too. And he just tries to make sure that his kid is raised right, and he doesn't try to force his religion on his kids. He still takes them to church, but he does let them know that this is going to be up to you in the future. If you really want to stick with this, I'm just introducing it to you so you could decide whether you want this or not. I have another buddy from the same area who grew up in Oakland, California, and when he talks about his relationship with his parents, it seems like he had a lot to recover from, and this guy is doing it right by his son and trying his best to do it all by himself. Guy's a devout plumber, trying to make sure that he's learning the basics of grappling as he moves forward in life. And I'm not going to name these people just because I want to respect their privacy. But when I go out and turn off the phones and turn off all the bad examples that the internet is showing me, you tend to see real life good examples. So am I saying that it's all bad? No, but am I saying we should ignore the red flags that a lot of these quote-unquote scientific studies are talking about, or are they just amplifying the data? Because I think a lot of the more active parents who are outside of the digital sphere doing it in real life aren't really there to answer the census or try to add to the data. So maybe the statistics might be actually skewed and paint a bit of a darker picture than we think. We don't know. But we should also take a look at the lowest examples or the worst examples of these permissive parents who allow their kids to do everything that they want and say, you know what, don't be like those people. And I think one of the best things that modern parents can do who see this going on and who understand exactly what I'm talking about, my advice to them would be to discipline your kids. Make sure that they are ahead of the pack by actually having an attention span longer than 5 seconds. Make sure that they know that they are loved by their family and that someone's in their corner. They're not always going to permit what it is they're doing out of love, because that's what parenting is, but they are going to want what's best for them, and they're never going to stop them from doing something to better their lives. But also, I think, in my honest opinion, and take this with a grain of salt, do it if you want, don't. But I think you should allow your kids who you're trying to raise normally to be aware of the ones that are being raised to be absolutely narcissistic, and make sure that they understand the principle of not mingling with those kids, because those kids are probably going to grow up to be very dark people and be in it for themselves, very selfish, to the point where they're not going to care who they hurt. You should probably teach your kids about dangers of life early and say, just watch out, because not everybody is going to be raised with a sense of discipline like you are. Not everybody's going to be raised in the same thing. And that's something I learned in my childhood. I was raised in a certain area, but then when I broke my bubble, went to college, and I learned of other people's backgrounds, that were very unstable, very crazy. I grew a better appreciation for what it is I had, even though I didn't really view it as perfect. But that is my whole spew on if Gen Alpha is really that quote-unquote cooked. And honestly, I will have to say it depends on how the parents raise them. I've seen a lot of examples online that say, yeah, they're cooked, but I think I've seen a lot of examples offline where I'm like, you know what, I think that there's some hope, and I don't want to be blackpilled, and I don't want to think that it's the end all be all and we only have a couple generations left of this nation or whatever. But what I will say is time will tell, the future will tell. But if we do face a worst case scenario, we just got to be ready to weather a storm and make sure that our kids don't end up like the masses that are coming out. But that's what I got to say. Peace out. I'll see you on the next one. Later.